Morning, everyone. We'll be starting in a minute or so. We'll just give some time for the last minute people just to join up. By the looks of the chat, a lot of you are already here, so that's good. I see that some people, this is the first session. Don't worry, you can go back and watch our previous videos. There is a link at the bottom of the page to our YouTube playlist that contains all of the previous lessons, so you can go back and watch those. And again, if you are struggling with any of the concepts that we cover, again, watch those videos, rewind, play back the sections multiple times until you do sort of understand and follow along. Can people in the chat just say if they can hear me clearly? And if they can, we will get started. Perfect. Sounds like everyone can hear me. So let's crack on. So as with all of these sessions, we're going to start with a little bit of a review as to what we did last week, just to make sure that you don't forget anything. I know it's quite a long time between each of these sessions. So basic reminder, the text editor that you're using, it doesn't really matter. However, we're obviously going to be showing examples using REPL. So REPL.it, you can go on there, create an account, write all of your code in there, and you can also execute it online. If you are using other online editors, that's perfectly fine. Or if you're using Python locally, that's also fine. But for this course, it's just a little bit easier for us to suggest that you use REPL because it's all there. You don't have to install anything. So hopefully everyone knows that URL. Again, if not, it is linked below the video, so you can easily get access to that. So, the basics of Python here, we started off with doing some hello world examples. So we're using the print statement. So you type out the word print, followed by a parentheses, followed by whatever message you want with inside double quotes, and that allows you to print out a message to the screen. Note that print is all in lowercase and there is no space after the word print in the start of the bracket, and that just allows you to display a message to the screen. We've then spoken about variables. So variables allow you to contain pieces of information and then reuse them. So in these examples, we have some strings, we have some integers, we have a float, and we have a Boolean. And again, the format for this is the variable name on the left-hand side, followed by an equals sign, and then on the right-hand side is the actual value that you want to store. We've then spoken about numerical operators. So this is how we do basic arithmetic within Python. So you've got the plus, the minus, multiplication, division. So multiplication is the star key, which is shift and the 8 key. So it's not A and X like you may have used in, if you sort of writing it out yourself. The division is then the forward slash. We then have an exponent, which is short for to the power of. So the 4 exponent 2 just means that 4 is squared. So it's 4 to the power of 2. And then finally the modulus, which is the percent key, and that gives you the remainder after doing the division. So 10 modulus 3. 3 goes into 9 without any decimal points, and then it leaves a remainder of 1. We then spoke about concatenation. So concatenation is the act of adding together 2 or more strings. So again, some examples on the screen there. We take some variables that contain strings and we add them together to make other variables, and that is called concatenation. And then last week we started to look at comments. So by using the hashtag, you can add a comment, and this just means that when your program is executed, whatever is part of the comment is just ignored. So you can either do that on a new line entirely, so that's the first example where we've got the hash and then the total including VAT, or you also have the option to do it at the end of a line of code, and that just means that anything after the hash character becomes a comment. And again, comments are useful for commenting your code, surprisingly, and this just means that when you come back to anything, weeks or months later, you can identify exactly what has happened and what you're trying to do. We then went on to this idea of casting. So because we were talking about different data types, we have the ability to change a data type from one type to another. So on the examples here, we have the ability to cast to an int, a float, and a string. So that takes whatever value you put within the brackets and then converts it into either an integer, a float, or a string, depending on which one you use there. So if you cast to an integer and you're using a float, it will just remove anything after the decimal point. If you cast an integer to a float, so that's the second example, y equals float 9, it turns that value of 9 into a float, which means adding a decimal point. And since obviously there is no information, it just adds 0.0. And then the string one changes whatever you enter into a string. And this is obviously very useful for when you're concatenating. So say you want to actually concatenate a integer value into a string, you will first of all have to cast it. We then looked at indexes. So indexes allow you to specifically select individual items from within a string at this point. So the important thing to remember here is that all indexes start at 0 within Python. So the first item of a string is at index 0. The second element is at index 1, and so on. You also have the option to do a -1 or a -2, a -3, and that means that you start from the end of the string as opposed to the start of it. So in order to get the first character from a string, that is index 0, and in order to get the last character from a string, that is index -1. And if you try to reference an index that isn't in the string, you will get an error, so you just have to watch out for that. We then finally looked at inputting data into the program. So obviously you've been doing a lot of examples about how to get the Python application to actually output information with the print statement. So then we looked at how you get information into the program, and this is using the input statement. So again, it's just the word input followed by some brackets, and then you have the option to put in a string as an input to that. And whatever you put in there, the computer will ask you that question, and then it'll just sit and wait until you enter some information and hit return. So an input, once it takes a value, it stores it in a variable. So it's always good to, assign it to a variable beforehand. So on that first line there, we've got name equals input. And that is taking whatever the user enters and it stores it in the variable name, which then allows us to print it out on the next line. And obviously we could do a whole different bunch of things with that information once it's been input into the computer. The second example then, we're trying to get an age. So input will always return a string by default. So if we are expecting the user to enter a number, we have to cast it. So this is why you did the casting stuff before. So here we're expecting someone's age. So age is typically just a whole number, so it makes sense to be an integer. So we cast the value that is given as an integer and we store it in the variable age. Then we do a little bit of manipulation on that variable. So we say that this person in 10 years' time will be this age. And then finally, we print out the information and again, we cast it because you can't add an integer to a string. So you can't do that with concatenation. So therefore, on the very last line, we have to cast age in 10 years to become a string in order to concatenate it with the in 10 years you will be line. So those are inputs. So now you can output information from your programs and you can also input it. So this is the start of, 95% of all programs that you will ever write will require some sort of user input and user output. So any questions that you might have about this? So Saf is in the chat this week answering questions as we go along. And as always, we have the Slido open. If you use the code Python 2020, you can go on there and you can ask questions and we will either answer them at the end of today's lesson if we have time or on Thursday. And Saf is also in there throughout the week answering them. So if you do have any problems between lessons, you can get additional help by asking questions on that Slido page. Once you've asked the question, you'll see a little reply comment underneath once Saf has answered it. So you can click on that to see what the response is. Okay, so let's start this week's lesson. So this week we're going to talk about something called conditionals. And this is the start of the, I guess, the logical aspect of programming. So everything that you've written so far has just been executed one line at a time. So when you hit run, what happens is your program gets executed on line 1, and then on line 2, and then on line 3, then on line 4, etc., until it hits the end of your code. And what conditionals allow us to do is basically pick and choose which lines get executed. So the first one that we're going to look at is something called if. So if is literally sort of as it sounds. It allows us to ask the question if something, and then we can do something based off the back of that. So this is the format that it looks like in Python. You have the it word. So if. So you start off your line saying if, followed by a space, and then you have some sort of a statement. So in this case, we're just saying if true, and then we carry out some action. So you'll notice here that each of the if lines ends with a colon. So that's important to note that you have ended whatever expression that you're trying to put in. And then you have a block of code underneath, which will only be executed if the statement above is true. So in the examples on the screen at the moment, only the top one will ever be printed. So if true, print this is always shown. Because that is true, that will always be shown. However, the second if example there, because it says that it's false, that line will never get printed out. So again, we'll go through and show more examples just so we can get this sort of set in your mind. But this is an important thing that you'll do over and over again whilst programming. So if statements are really, really powerful. So the basic format looks like this. Again, we've sort of just briefly gone through this, but it's if followed by some sort of an expression. And that expression, if it is true, the code underneath will be run. If it is false, it won't be run. So it's you write if followed by some sort of a question that you're trying to check to see whether it's true or false. And then if it is, it runs the code. So the important thing with a if statement, the computer needs to know what block of code should be run as part of that if statement. And to do this within Python, we have to indent it. So indenting is literally just using either a couple of spaces or the tab key. And it just means that you're moving your code in a few characters. And that shows that that piece of code then should be run as part of that if statement. So the example on the screen here, we set a variable called name, and we set it to equal our trusty person, Alice. Then we are checking to see if the variable name equals Alice. We'll watch out at the moment there that says that there are 2 equal signs. That's not an error. That is how we compare different values. We will go on to a list of those comparisons shortly. But at the moment, this statement is just saying that if the variable name equals Alice, you want to print out the message, hello Alice. And the important thing to take from this is that it's indented. So everything that you indent underneath that if statement will be run as part of that if block. Then to drop out of the if block, you just dedent and you follow the same line as where the if starts. So it's like this. So as part of this, the hello Alice and the how are you lines are both printed as part of the if block. And then you'll see there that the code moves back to the left-hand side to say print thanks. So the 2 indented lines, the hello Alice and how are you, are part of the if block. And then the print thanks is always shown because it's not part of the if block. So the hello Alice and how are you are only shown if the person's name is Alice. However, thanks is always shown there. And again, it's just sort of a standard format that you'll use a blank line after an if statement just to separate what is part of that if statement to what is the rest of the code. It just makes things a little bit clearer. So we'll now look at comparators. So this is what we use as part of that expression within the if statement. So you've seen there that we were using the double equals sign, and that basically compares whatever is on the left-hand side to whatever is on the right-hand side. So remember, in Python, a single equals sign is the assignment operator. So that's how you actually assign a value into a variable. The double equals signs is how we actually compare one value to another. So if whatever is on the left-hand side is the same as whatever is on the right-hand side, it will return true. If whatever's on the left doesn't match what's on the right, it will return false. We then have this idea of a does not equal. So this is the exclamation mark followed by the equal sign. And that implies that whatever on the left does not equal whatever is on the right. So the example here that Bob does not equal Charlie, that is a true statement. So therefore that would return true. If you did that Bob does not equal Bob, that is a false statement because Bob does equal Bob. So that would return false. We then have less than and greater than. So less than is pointing to the left-hand side, greater than is pointing to the right-hand side. And that just implies that, you know, whatever is on the left and the right are either less than or greater than. So 4 is less than 10. That is also a true statement. And then 12 is greater than 8. That is also a true statement. So I think all of these are actually true statements. And then finally, the last comparators that we have are the less than and equals to. So that means that it's less than or equals to. So 7 is less than or equal to 7. That is a true statement. And then 8 is greater than or equal to 5. So that allows you to check, obviously, if it's equal or greater than. And those are the different comparators that you will use as part of your if statements. So there are lots of different ways that you can compare the different values depending on exactly what those values are. So let's have a look at some of these in action. So again, we're going to just do a basic little setup here. We're going to create a variable called name and assign Alice to it. So a string of Alice is in our variable name. Then we'll take a look at our first if statement. So if name double equals sign Alice. So again, we're comparing what's on the left-hand side of the double equals to what's on the right-hand side. So the variable name contains Alice, and we're comparing that with a string called Alice. So that is a true statement, so therefore it will print out hello Alice. And then let's have a look at the next if statement. So if name does not equal Charlie, so the variable name, again, it still contains the word Alice. So the comparison that we're making here is that Alice does not equal Charlie. So again, that is a true statement. The string Alice does not equal the string Charlie. So therefore, it will print out you are not Charlie. So for both of those examples, it prints out the message because the expressions are true. So we'll now look at this with a integer. So we're going to create another variable called age. We're setting that to a value of 20. And then we're asking the same sort of questions as part of these if statements. So if age is greater than 17, so the value that's in the variable age is currently 20. So we're asking the question, is 20 greater than 17? Which I hope you all know is the true answer. So yes, 20 is larger than 17. So therefore it's going to print out the message, you can vote. And then the second if statement, if age is greater than or equal to 21. So again, age contains the value of 20. So we're asking the question, is 20 greater than or equal to 21? The answer is no. So therefore it completely skips the content of that if statement, and it will not print you are 21 or over. So the example here, if you ran this, it would only say, it would only print out you can vote. So if a if statement is false, it doesn't print any of the content that is inside it. It just completely sort of bypasses it and moves on to the next line. So the inner block within an if statement is only executed if the statement is true. So following off from the if, it's always a good idea to have an alternative. Um, so if this is true, do that. Otherwise, do something else. And this is where the else statement comes in. So else is a sort of catch-all statement that will have a block of code that gets executed if your if statement is false. So as a quick example on the screen here, we are just comparing two values against each other. So if 1 double equals sign 1, so does the value of 1 equal 1? The answer is yes. So it's going to print yes. However, if that statement was false, instead of printing yes, it would print no. So it allows you to have an alternate path for your code to be executed. So if the statement is true, it will print whatever is in the first indented block. And if the statement is false, it will print whatever is in the second block. So again, hopefully we've got a few more examples. So this is just the basic overview of how it looks. So it's exactly the same syntax and format as the other if statements you've been doing. So if expression, colon, and then whatever you code you put in there. And then on a new line, indented at the same level as your original if statement, you type the word else, followed by a colon, and then again, whatever code that you put as part of that block will be run if the expression is false. So example of this here, so if name equals Alice, we're just checking to make sure that it equals Alice, and then we're printing hello Alice. And in the event that name doesn't equal Alice, obviously we're just printing out another message here that says you are not Alice. So we're kind of filling in all the different possible routes that the program could take. So if you imagine, you're walking down a path and you can either go left or right, this is exactly what a if statement allows you to do. So if you feel like taking the left-hand path, go left. Otherwise, you are forced to take the right-hand path and you will walk down that way. That is, in effect, what an if and an else statement does. So another example, we'll go back to this age one. So set a variable called age to equal 15. If the age is greater than or equal to 21, so 15 is greater than or equal to 21, that is a false statement. So it's not going to print the message you are 21 or over, and instead it's only going to run the code that is contained within the else block. So it's going to print out the message you are 20 or younger. So a few things to, I guess, watch out for when you're writing these things is make sure that you include that colon at the end of the line. Otherwise, you will get an error. And also make sure that you are indenting. Otherwise, you will also get an error. And again, when we go into some of the live coding, I will show you those errors and things to watch out for. So that is actually where we're up to now. So we're going to move on to coding time section A. So Saf will have put the questions at the bottom of the screen now. So we are on week 3. So they should be right at the very bottom of the page underneath the video. I will also just bring up the questions on here, just in case you can't access them at the bottom of the page. So for section A, we're just going to go through some examples of using the if statement, just to get you used to that. So they are at the bottom of the page for those people that are live with us on Twitch. Otherwise, they're on the screen now. And I'll just leave those up for a minute or two, and then I will, I guess, do some live coding just to show you how you would go about solving some of these problems. But do start having a go at them now. So hopefully everyone has REPL up in another window and can start coding along. So I'll give you, I don't know, 2-3 minutes to start these examples yourself, see how far you go, and then I will come back and show you through some of them. Okay, as people work through these examples, I'll just do a little bit of a live code, just for those who are perhaps struggling a little bit. So I'll bring up the editor, and what was the first question? Let's have a look. So we're just trying to do an if statement for somebody's name. So we'll start off just with a variable. So we'll say name, and I'll put in my name. So again, hopefully everyone's familiar with how to just do a assignment of a variable. So notice again that single equal sign here is used when we're assigning a value into a variable. And then we'll just do an if statement. So if followed by a space, followed by whatever we're trying to compare against. So I'm going to say that if the name, and then we're going to use the comparator. So in this case, I'm going to check it against an absolute value. So I'm going to say two equal signs, so that if the variable name equals, let's say, Saf, I want to say a message. So if name equals Saf, which it clearly doesn't, we're going to print out hello. And I'll do a second one here, that if name equals instead Jake, we are going to say, we're going to print out, what should we print out? Good morning. Okay, so we've made a few little changes there. I'm going to run the code and we'll see what happens. So again, press the run button at the top of the screen, and on the right hand side in the black box, it shows the results of the program. So in this example, it's printed out good morning. So hopefully that is understood by everyone, that this first if statement never runs because this statement is not true here. So name does not equal Saf, and that's why this never gets printed. However, on the second example, the name does equal Jake, and therefore that is why good morning is printed out. So again, we can have multiple messages printed out, all part of this if statement. So I can say here, how are you? So run that again. And because that block is all there, it's all inside the same if block, it all gets run as part of that item. So again, with Saf, we could say another print, how are you? And again, when we run that, you'll see that that second line there doesn't get printed. So none of this code here is getting executed because this statement on line 3 is false. However, all of this code is getting executed on lines 8 and 9 because the if statement on 7 is true. And then to finally show you that a line is always printed if it's outside of the block, we'll just say this is the end. So we'll run that, and you'll see here we print out good morning, how are you, and then this is the end. So that statement on line 11 is always printed because it is just a print statement. It's not part of any of these if conditionals. So if I were to change, say, my name up the top here to be Jacob, and we ran the code again, this time the only thing that is printed out is the line this is the end. So again, if we look through our code here, the first if statement, the name doesn't equal Saf, therefore this is all false. And now on line 7 for the second if statement, name no longer equals Jake, and therefore that is also not printed out. So the only bit that is executed is line 11 in the end, which is why it displays this is the end. So some common little errors that you might see here are if you miss the colon at the end of a line. So if I run that again here, we'll see we're getting what's called an invalid syntax error. So you just have to read through whatever error is shown on the right hand side in red, and it generally gives you an indication as to where you've gone wrong. So we've got some sort of an invalid syntax. That means that what we've written is incorrect. It's then we've got a pointer to a particular part of our code, and it also says at the top here that it's on line 3. So if I look over on the left hand side to line 3, it's somewhere on here. This pointer is indicating that it's after the word or the string Saf. So it's something to do here. You'll notice that the editor has also helpfully provided a little red squiggly underline, which is indicating that it feels that something is wrong here. So I know that something is up here, and I know that at the end of each if statement, I always need a colon. So therefore, I'll add that back in. As soon as I add that back in, the little red squiggle goes away. And then obviously, when I run my program, it successfully runs. Another issue that you might have is this idea of not indenting your code. So if I come through here and run that, so let's say, so here I've got an if statement, however, lines 4 and 5 have not been indented. So I'm going to run that again to see what the issues are. And as you can see, it now says that it's got something called an indentation error, and it expected an indented block. So again, it mentions line 4 at the start of our error message, so I know that it's around that point. And it's also saying that it's likely to be at the start of that line because it's pointing to the P. So what that is asking for is for me to come along and indent it. So I'll run that again, having just indented that one line, and we'll see what happens. So this time the program actually runs. However, we might have another bug in our actual code. And this is because this second print line is not indented, and therefore it's not part of this if statement. So it acts exactly like line 11 does and always gets printed. So in order for this line to only be executed as part of that if statement, it also needs to be indented. So as you can see on the right hand side, it does, at the moment it's printing out how are you, but we only want that if the person's name is Saf. So we're going to indent that code. Oops, if I can select it. There we go. And now when I run that again, we should see that it no longer prints that message out because it belongs to part of that if statement. So again, you can put like additional lines as part of these if statements. So as long as it's all indented on the same one, it will still run. So I run that. Yep, that all works. So again, if you are questioning like what you can do and what will happen if you do certain things, just try them out. You can't really break anything. So make a little change, run your code, see what happens. If things don't go as expected, you will get some sort of error message that you can just go through and fix. But do just try things out because it is a fantastic way of learning. So what we'll do now is we'll just add an else statement to these examples. So again, on line 11 here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to write the word else, and then I'm going to remember that I need to add a colon. So I'll add the colon, and then within the REPL editor, when I press return from this line, it will automatically know that my code needs to be indented, and it will take me to that indented position already. So you'll see there that my cursor, hopefully you can see it blinking, is already indented, waiting for me to type. So I'm going to print another message here that says, hello world. So we'll run that again and we'll see what happens. So now we're getting the output hello world followed by this is the end. And the reason why we're getting that is because the name does not equal Jake, it equals Jacob. So lines 9 and 10, the ones that I've highlighted here, don't get executed because that's only executed if the statement is true. And instead the else path is taken and it prints hello world. So this allows you to divert the code to running down different paths. I did see one message in the chat, and I think we had it on Slido as well, about how to comment multiple lines. So what you can do is you can highlight all of the code that you want to comment out. And then if you're using a Mac, you can press the command /. And if you're on Windows, you can press Control /. And that will comment out the entire block. And the same is true then for uncommenting the lines. So you'll see here that I've still commented, or I've still selected all of those lines. And I'm just going to press the exact same keys again. So the Control key and the / key at the same time. And you'll notice that then just removes the comments. So that's a quick way that you can comment out large blocks of code. So that's always a good one to remember. Okay, hopefully everyone has had a chance of going through the different questions. Again, if not, we can you can do those towards the end of the hour, or obviously after we finish up the lesson here. So we're just going to jump back now to the second half of today's lesson. And for this, we're now going to introduce an idea called elif. So elif is short for else if, and it basically allows us to add another pathway to the if statement. So instead of just having a left and a right path that the code can go down, the elif allows us to provide different pathways depending on different expressions. So the most basic sort of example here that we can go through is it's set up exactly the same as you've been doing your if and your else statements. However, now we throw in a elif, so ELIF, so again short for else if, and it takes the exact same format as the if statement. So you add in another expression, and again, if that expression is true, it will execute the code that is indented below it. The important thing to remember about an elif statement, and I guess an if statement as a whole, is that it will only ever execute one pathway. So if you imagine here, we've got three pathways on the screen. So the print hello Alice is one pathway, the print hello Bob is a second pathway, and the else statement at the end, the print you must be Charlie, is the third pathway. So the code gets executed from the top to the bottom. It will first of all check the expression on the first if statement. So it will check to see if name equals Alice. If that is true, it will execute that code, and then the rest of this code will all be ignored because it's already taken that one pathway. If name doesn't equal Alice, it will then try and execute the next pathway, which is the elif name equals Bob. So it will try and see if that statement is true. If that is true, it will execute that code and again completely jump out of the the rest of the if statement. If that is also false, it will then fall back on that else statement, and that else in this case is a complete catch-all and will always be run if none of the other expressions turn out to be true. So again, another example here, and in this time we're actually going to ask the user for some input. So to begin with, we're trying to get the user's age. So we ask for the input, we cast it to an integer, and we store it in the variable age. And then for the rest of the if statement, we're then going to basically check to see how old the user is, and then print different messages depending on how old they are. So again, the execution starts from top to bottom. So the first one, if the age is less than or equal to 13, we're going to print the message you are 13 or younger. If that isn't true, we'll move on to the next one. So the elif. So if the age is less than 18, it will then say you are between 14 and 17. So this is an interesting one here because obviously you've just written that age is less than 18. You've not stated that age is between 14 and 17. So this is where you've sort of got to have the implied logic that if the user was less than or equal to 13, that first block of code would have been executed. However, since it hasn't been executed, if the second block of code that says age is less than 18 gets executed, it implies that, well, the user has to be older than 13 already. And obviously they have to be less than 18. So that's why we are printing out the message you are between 14 and 17. If both of those statements are false, it means that the user clearly must be, 18 or older. So the third statement here, the elif age equals 18. So there we're actually implying that the user is exactly 18 years old. In that case, we're going to print you are 18. And then finally, we have this else statement, which is the catch-all. So if none of those previous things were true, it's going to print out the message, you are 19 or over. Okay, so order and sort of like the logical idea that if a previous statement hasn't run, it implies information to where you currently are. That's a sort of important thing to remember. So we'll show an example of that now. So this is exactly the same code, other than I've added an additional else statement in that says if the person's age equals 0, and we're going to print out the message you aren't born yet. So the thing to remember here is, again, that the code is run from the top to the bottom. And if any of the statements is true, that is the pathway that your execution will take. So I put in a comment here on this elif age equals 0 that this block of code can never, ever, ever be run. And that is because the first statement as part of the if, so if age is less than or equal to 13, if the age is 0, that first statement will always be true, and therefore that is where the program's execution will actually happen, and it will skip all the rest of these elifs and the else. So the order that you put these rules are very important. I guess I should also note that you can have as many elifs as you want. So in these examples, we've just got obviously 1 or 2, just to show you a general idea, but you can have as many different elifs as you want. So that's a good thing to remember, obviously, if you are looking for specific values for your expressions. So in order to fix the example that is currently on the screen, all we have to do is we have to move that specific expression to the top of our if statement. So now the first thing that we are checking is if the age equals 0, and then we're going to print, right, you are not born yet. And then we're going to start comparing the actual ages. So the first elif is the age less than or equal to 13. So in theory, it can be anything less than or equal to 13 other than the distinct value 0, because that is already had an expression beforehand. So that is how you would get that code to run. So if you are struggling with, you sort of run your code and you're like, oh, this isn't working as expected, just sort of logically step through any if and elif statements that you have to make sure that they are in the correct order. And then the final thing that we're going to cover today then is the idea of and, or, and not. And this allows us to basically make more complicated expressions to check as part of an if statement. So we'll throw these on the screen now. So the and statement allows you to collect together two independent expressions, and in order for them all to be true, both sides need to be true. So the expression on the left of the and needs to be true, and the expression on the right of the and also needs to be true. If either of them are false, the entire statement is false. So in this example, we're going to say that if age is greater than 12 and age is also less than 20, so the age would have to be 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. That's the only numbers that are true for both of those statements together. So therefore, we would print the message, you are a teenager. So if you want to compare multiple things at the same time and for them to have them all be true, you'd use an and statement. The or statement in the second example is I guess, not quite the opposite, but it basically means that either of your expressions can be true. So one can be true or the other can be true. So in this example, the age is less than 13 or age is greater than 19. So you can see there that obviously if the age was, say, 10, it would only make one of those expressions true. So age less than 13 would be true, but age greater than 19 would be false. So if you used an and statement there, the entire thing would be false. But because you're using an or statement, it just allows the either expression to be true. So therefore, age is in fact less than 13. Therefore, we can print the message, you are not a teenager. And then finally, we have the ability to use this not keyword. And all this does is basically it flips the results. So if you're getting a true statement and you put not before it, it will make a false statement. if you have a false statement and you put not before it, it will make a true statement. So in this example here, that if age is greater than 12 and age is less than 20, so without the not statement, that would actually just show you that they're a teenager. But by surrounding it by a not, and in this case, we've just put some brackets in around those statements just to make it clear that we want this entire thing to be sort of flipped. We put not before that, and then that negates that statement. So we're actually looking for people that are not teenagers. So without the not on that last example, it would just find you the ages that were teenagers. However, when we surround it by the not, it negates that fact, and therefore it flips it around so that we're actually looking for anybody that is not a teenager. So this is how you start to build up more complicated expressions as part of your if statements. Again, these can be used as either an if or an elif, so they're interchangeable. You can use them in both. Just be careful if you are adding multiples of these together, because you have to make sure that all of them are true. So you could actually say that if age is greater than 12 and age is less than 20 and age equals 35 and age does not equal 0. So you can put multiple of these together to make even more complicated statements and expressions to check. So that is and, or, and not. Okay, and then that leaves us now to some additional questions. So section B, again, the questions are listed below. I will bring them up for people. If I can, still section A questions. Let me find section B. So again, we're just sort of going through and we are going to be using all of our different if, elif, and else statements. So again, all of these questions are underneath the video on Twitch. So underneath week 3, you're now on section B. So for some of these now, we're actually going to I guess we're going to make you use all of the knowledge that you've learned over the past 3 weeks. So for question 1, we're going to get you to use the input statement so that you're actually collecting information, and then you're going to use the if and else statements to actually validate what that user input is, and then print different messages based around that. So a bunch of good questions on there for everyone to do. I'll probably give you, should I give you a couple of minutes to perhaps have a go at these, and then we'll come back and I'll answer any questions that might be on Slido, and if people require extra sort of live coding, we can perhaps go through 1 or 2 of these examples. We've got about 10 or so minutes left of the lesson. If you obviously don't get through all these questions, we do advise you to spend a little bit of time outside the lessons doing them. Obviously, the more of these examples that you do and that you understand, the easier you'll find later weeks, and the more that you'll get from this course. And all of these questions are just practicing, I guess, the basic sort of knowledge that is required in all programming. So perhaps if you are a little bit more advanced and you're finding these questions a little bit easy, I think you'd still find value in having a go at them, because it just reinforces that knowledge that you will use throughout every other programming example that you will do. So it really is good just to reinforce that base knowledge. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to have a look through these questions and start having a go, and then we'll come back to answer some final questions. Okay, I've just had a quick look through the chat and I see there are some questions in there, so I'm just going to attempt to answer some of them. So again, feel free to sort of carry on programming if you are. Again, you can rewatch this last part of the video if it helps at a later date. So the first question we've had is how do you identify an odd or an even number? So to do this, the simplistic way of doing it is actually using the modulus character. So if you remember what the modulus does, is it returns the remainder that is left after a division. So if let's start with, let's just say we've got a value called number and we're going to give it a value of, say, 7. And then I'll do this all in an if statement since we've been learning that today. So we're going to say the if number modulus by 2. So what that's doing is it's going to give us the return value of whatever the remainder is after we divide the number by 2. So if we divide 7 by 2, it goes into, obviously 6, and then we have a remainder of 1. And within programming, 1 is actually considered true and 0 is considered false. So if we just have that as our if statement, we'll see what happens. So I'll just add some code around this so that we can actually see it. So I'm just going to print out here that I'm just going to say that prints out 1, and then I'll add an else statement afterwards, and I'm just going to have that print out 0. So I'm just doing this at the moment because I'm not quite sure what it's going to be. So I'm just going to run that code and we'll see what the result is. So for the number 7, it's printing out 1. So this block of code is run when the number is 7. So if I change that number to 6, I want to see if this block of code gets run. So I run that out now, and you'll see that it's 0. So I'm pretty sure now that this is an even number and that this one is an odd number. So I run that again. And 6 there equals an even number. And let's change this to what? 39. Run that again. Let's see if that is. Yep, and then that comes up as an odd number. So again, to sort of validate our point here, I'll comment all of that out. So again, I selected everything and I pressed Control / at the same time, and that commented everything out. So I could just do a statement of like if 1, and we'll see what happens. So print hello, and then I'm going to do another if statement. So if 0, print world. So again here, I'm just literally testing things out. I write a little bit of code and then I run it. So I'm going to run that and we're going to see what happens. So when I run that block of code there, it only prints out hello, which means that this never gets executed, which means therefore that 0 is implied as false. So perhaps I now want to check, well, actually, what happens if I put, say, like -1? So let's run that and see what happens. So Python also is interpreting the value of -1 as being true. So basically, true is any value and false is no value and 0. So that's one thing to sort of remember. But again, by doing these sort of little examples, you can sort of try things out yourself. So I wonder if we could say if a string called hello, let's see if Python interprets the string hello as being true or false. So because again it's printed the word hello, it implies that the string of hello is also a true statement. So perhaps I could do a complete empty string and we'll see if that runs. So that time when I run that, an empty string is actually classed as being false. So if the user, say, doesn't enter any information, you could say if, input, and if the input is empty, that comes out as false. So if I was saying, say, name equals input, what is your name? So if I did that and then I check to see if the user had actually entered that, so let's say hello, and then I'm going to concatenate the name that they've entered. So if I run this code now, it's going to ask me the question, what is your name? And again, it's just going to sit until I enter some data. So we'll run that and I'll put in Jake, I'll hit return, and it says the message, hello Jake. So that's sort of expected because as we just looked at, a string that contains some information is classed as true. So now if we run this again, but this time I'm just going to hit the return key. And if I hit the return key, the string is empty, and then Python interprets that as being false as part of an if statement. So therefore it doesn't print out hello Jake or whatever name you put. So again, we could try this. If I run that again, perhaps I'm going to put the value of 0 in. So let's see what happens this time. So this time it actually prints hello 0. And the difference there is because 0 has been treated as a string and not as an integer. So an integer of 0 is classed as false. However, a string of 0 is still some character within a string, and therefore that is classed as false. So hopefully that gives you, or it's given people an idea on how to do the odd and even question. We're running out of time now, so I'm just going to quickly go on to the Slido questions, just to make sure that these get answered. Actually, a quick bit of housekeeping if anyone has to jump off at 11. It's half term next week, so we're not actually going to be running the course next week. So you've got a week off to relax and sort of recover from everything that you've been learning for these last few weeks. So we've got Thursday's session this week on the 21st, but then we don't have any of the lessons next week. So next Tuesday and next Thursday we are off, and this lesson will be starting up again on the 2nd of June, so that week after your half term. So if you do show up next week, I mean, we'll probably just drop a message in to say that, oh, by the way, we're not running the lessons next week. But if you do jump on and you're wondering where we are, that is why we are not here, because it is half term. So again, if you want to carry on coding next week, make sure that you've done all of these examples, go through them. You can do the same questions multiple times, just so you get a feel for everything. But the next proper lesson in terms of teaching will be the 2nd of June. So not next week, but the week after. Okay, and then finally the Slido questions. So do you have any good recommendations for things to practice coding? Yeah, so what I would do here is I would Google, literally just try and search the internet for some coding questions. So a good sort of resource to look for is probably if you Google, I don't know, like Python interview questions. That should come up with some good examples for things. There is also another website called Advent of Code. So it traditionally runs at Christmas, and it gives a single programming question every single day as part of Advent. So on there at the moment, I believe there's like 4 or 5 years worth of questions. So there's probably a couple of hundred questions that you can go through. So again, if you Google Advent of Code, that is a pretty good resource. How do you validate that we followed this course, like our name and details for the certificates? So towards the end of the course, so probably week 9 or 10, we will provide you with a method for you to get your code across to us. So we'll probably just give you an email address or a form that you can fill in. And as part of that, you will give us links to all of your REPLs or wherever you've been writing your code. And then we'll just go through to make sure that you've at least attempted all of the questions for each of the sessions. Next question, I've accidentally selected and deleted anything. Is there a way to get it back? So if you've literally just done it, you can do the undo key. So the undo key will be Control or Command Z, and it'll just undo whatever you've done. Unfortunately, if you've gone off the web page or whatever, and you have deleted stuff, it will be lost. So it gives you a good opportunity, I guess, to have another practice and to redo the questions or whatever you've deleted. Next one, another question about, different questions. So again, Google, so Python interview questions, Advent of Code, both fantastic resources. Question 4 asks the user enter their name of getting the following message. String. So it might be nice here to, if you could, whoever has asked this question, if you could reply with the actual code that you've put on. We can obviously debug it. Again, Saf might have actually answered this in the chat already, but you can just post your code in so we can actually have a look. Can you share with us the shortcut? Yeah, so the shortcut to comment out is by pressing Control and the / key at the same time if you're on Windows. So that's two keys at the same time. So highlight the code that you want to comment out and press Control and /. If you're on a Mac, it's Command /. But on Windows, Control and the / key. I can't find the previous videos. Where do I search on YouTube? So there is a private playlist listed as a link underneath the videos on Twitch. So it's about halfway down. I think it's in the FAQ section. It's actually the first question in the FAQ at the bottom of the Twitch page called "Can I watch the videos after the lesson?" There is a link at the very end called Playlists on YouTube, and that will take you to all of the videos for this course on YouTube. What else have we got? Is there a quick way to group play? Yeah, so hopefully you all know the comments. So to get the certificate, we just want you to attend all 10 lessons and provide or show us that you've at least had a go at answering the questions for each of those lessons. So again, on week 9 or 10, we'll be providing you a way for you to get your code samples across to us, and then we will just validate that you've done that. For session 2, question 6, if you don't take, yeah. So again, on all of these questions, it's sort of how you interpret the questions. So obviously you can use an input statement if you want, but you can also just write a variable for things. But there are multiple ways that you can code all of these examples. So don't feel like if on the Thursday sessions when we go through the answers, if your code is slightly different, don't worry. As long as it gets the same sort of output at the end, that is still completely valid. So coding is sort of more like, writing an essay in English, where there are multiple different ways you can do it. It's not like questions in maths where there's only one specific answer. So think of it more of like you are sort of writing an essay. How long did it take you to get decent at coding? So again, that's sort of a question of like how long is a piece of string? It will take you a long time to get to different levels. So Saf has been coding now probably for like a year and a half. He's able to do a lot of different problems she's able to solve with coding. I've been coding for probably close to 20 years or so I have a lot more experience and a lot more experience in different languages and in different situations. So I sort of bring the background knowledge of, I've dealt with this problem elsewhere before. But again, as with most things in life, you can learn the basics in a few weeks or a few months. But to get really, really good at things, obviously it takes a lot of dedication and practice. So if you are, obviously if you are enjoying programming here, it's fantastic. And the longer that you spend coding and doing sort of these problems, the better you will get and the more experience that you will have. Can you do maths with a float and an integer? Yes, you can. Again, try it out. If it fails, cast it. If it doesn't, you've answered the question yourself. Question 13, we will do it on Thursday's lesson. How do you comment out a block of code? So I think I've gone through that. So Control and the / key. Hi, I really want to be a software engineer at Google. What would suggest learning languages? So yeah, I mean, start off learning Python, and then as you go, I think you'll naturally want to solve more problems, and then from that you will learn about additional things. So to actually work at Google, you probably need multiple languages and some sort of background in the theory of computing. So again, if you do have the option at school to do either a computing GCSE or A level, that will cover a lot of the basics of how sort of computers work and will start to point you in the right direction. Obviously, you then have options to go to university, or the internet is full of different resources about how you can, code various different things. So I suggest that you just sort of start Googling, and perhaps you can ask some questions live in the chat, and we can go through and answer more specifics. But again, it's all about just building up that experience, writing small projects yourself, and then improving them. And then that'll sort of take you down the pathway of knowing all of these things. How do you know you're good enough to apply for a software engineering job? Just do it. You'll know. So get your CV together, use the examples, start to build up a portfolio, apply for those jobs and see what happens. Take feedback that they give you, and then obviously improve. So if you're not getting any interviews because your CV doesn't have enough experience, try and get some experience on your CV. So you can do this with, say, working on open source projects. So again, if you Google GitHub, GitHub is a open repository where people work on these open source projects, which basically means that you can contribute to real life software projects freely. So you can go on there, find a project that you're sort of interested in, and start to contribute. And then that looks absolutely fantastic on a CV if you are applying for engineering jobs. It shows that you've got passion, dedication, and obviously you can show off some code if you are at the more junior side of your career. A lot of software engineering jobs will also have a tech test to sort of just validate that you can code. A lot of the questions that we do throughout this course are the sort of questions that you will be asked to do during those technical tests. So again, that's a good reason why you should hang around and answer all the questions. Do you mind if we use single quotes? No, so you can use single quotes or double quotes as long as you use the same one to start and end the string. However, you might want to try out and see what the different escaped characters work with single quotes. So I'll leave that for you to discover what happens if you try and do, say, a new line with single quotes. If you want to work at Google, so I think we've sort of answered that. So yeah, more languages, more experience, and you can certainly get there. Google is always after talented engineers. Have you got any tips around starting AI neural networks using Python? So again, I would just start Googling those exact words, look at some tutorials, look at whatever posts people have written, see what you understand, and follow links for the things that you don't understand, and do extra searches for the things that you don't understand, and just start to build up your knowledge. The idea of like AI and neural networks is a very broad topic, and it sort of means different things to a lot of different people. So again, it depends exactly what you mean around that. But there are a lot of different resources online that you can start to, say do image recognition and sort of build things up that way. There are a lot of good resources. Again, you can just Google them. Yes, we'll be learning about tuples in a later lesson. So we go through all of the different data collections that Python has. Hi, I'm doing a course wondering what a tuple and dict is. So yeah, again, we're doing all collections. So that will include lists, tuples, dictionaries, and sets. So that's, I think, on probably lesson 5, I think we start those. So we've just got some other bits and pieces to go through before we start that. Again, if you want to know what these are right away, Google has a huge amount of resources that you can find online. So literally just ask the question, what is a tuple in Python? And you'll get some sort of answer. What's a complex? I'm not entirely sure. Again, Google that. So again, even with my experience here, it shows that I've not come across certain terms and stuff, or the way that people have worded things. So never be afraid to ask sort of a question that you think is might be easy, because not everybody knows all of the answers. Again, just try and Google things to find that information out. I'm having trouble using Code Wars. It says for me to do more questions, I need to fix code using def. So again, the def keyword is to define a function, which is also something that we'll be getting onto. I think that's on week 6 or 7. So just hold out, and perhaps you'll learn how to do that. Why can't I write this? So you probably can. I would say watch out for, I guess, the number of opening and closing brackets, just to make sure that you've got the correct number. But from my initial quick look at that, it should be okay. 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, I mean, I think you should be able to do that. Again, the way that I would solve this is I would have to write the code myself and see what errors came up, or if it didn't return the right answer, and then I would take it from there. So that's fine. I'm finding it quite hard as everything is coming up as false. Okay, so hopefully some of those last questions that I went through sort of showed you more examples of true and false. If not, on Thursday's lesson, obviously we will go through all of these answers, so that should hopefully clear things up. I got a syntax error putting in if name is Bob. So if that is all the code that you've put in, you are missing the colon at the end of the line here. So that's always one to remember. Again, hopefully the error message that you're getting is pointing out and saying that something is missing there. Also watch out for the red squiggly line, because that will help you. I went through the example for odd and even, so that's using the modulus and dividing it by 2. How do you stop users from inputting negative numbers for age? So again, you've got to think this through logically. At the moment, we've not taught you any way to re-ask a question if you're not happy with their input. This is something we will cover in future lessons, but for the moment, you know how to do a if statement. So the simplest way that you can do that is basically display a message telling that the user has entered the incorrect information if the value is less than or equal to 0. How do you determine odd numbers? So again, modulus 2. Question 4 we'll go through on Thursday because we're well over now. When's it necessary to put spaces in the code? So you only need spaces around what we class as like keywords within Python. So like the if or the else. So around sort of statements like that, you'll need spaces. Everywhere else, you don't really need them. Again, try and put the spaces, run the code, see if you get an error. And if you don't get an error, your code is fine. If you do get an error, obviously then you can adjust. Question 4, how do I find a name? So again, we'll do that on Thursday. Do we need to force the use of upper, lowercase for the coding to work? So I'm not entirely sure what that question will be. So you can do a dot upper or a dot lower on strings, and that will make them upper and lowercase. When you are doing comparisons, though, the strings need to be identical. So if you're comparing the string Jake with a capital J against a string that is Jake with a lowercase j, they are different strings. So that might be where that question is coming from. When do you have to use a single equal and a double equal? So a single equal is an assignment operator. So it's saying whatever is put on the right-hand side should be stored in whatever is on the left-hand side. So that's how we declare a variable and assign values to it. The double equal sign is a comparison, and that is comparing whatever is on the left-hand side to whatever is on the right-hand side. If you put a single equal sign, it will just assign whatever you've put on the right-hand side to the left-hand side. So you won't get a syntax error. However, it will behave unexpected if you do that as part of a if statement. Can you use multiple if statements, or do you have to use lots of elifs? So yes, you can use multiple if statements. However, basically then you lose that ability for the previous conditions to also be taken into account. So, probably about 45 minutes ago now, I went through that example with someone's age. And if you are implying that, or if your first if statement is asking the expression, are they less than or equal to 13? The next elif was then checking to see if they were less than 18. And that second one only applied because of that first statement was there, that was basically removing any people that were under the age of 13. So yes, you can use multiple if statements. You just have to follow through the logic of what will actually be executed. Invalid syntax. So let's have a quick look. So this top line looks good. So we've got 1, we've got 2 opening brackets, you've got 2 closing brackets, so that seems fine. Age equals the age that you've taken, which is an int plus 15. That also looks fine. We're then printing, so you're concatenating a bunch of different strings together. So you've got one string here, you're then adding a string here. However, at this point, you are no longer adding anything else. So it looks like you're missing an equal, another plus sign here in order to add the next string together. And everything else on there looks good. So it looks like you just missed a single plus there. So try that out, see what happens. Exercise name. So again, I think a lot of these sort of questions we'll go through on Thursday to answer. I think we've already spent, or we're way over our time here. So I don't know if anyone is still actually watching or if you're allowed to jump off. So thanks for joining today. So again, Thursday so I guess any other questions that you've got before Thursday, Slido, use the code Python 2020. And the next session will be Thursday, 21st of May. So in 2 days' time, 10 a.m. back on Twitch. Catch up on the videos on YouTube or Twitch if you've missed out any of this lesson. And we will see you on Thursday. Thanks a lot. Bye.